I got to be honest with you, here on Alex Garrett Podcast, it's good to be back up and talking after a few days dealing with bronchitis. The battle's not over yet, but I'm well enough to talk and not feverish and whatnot. But, you know, we've heard today about the fact that the Trump organization found guilty on all 9 counts by the New York State Attorney General. We heard today that the January 6th committee wants to refer criminal, recommendations, criminal referrals to the DOJ. But there's one big case that we're not hearing about in the mainstream news. The deposition of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Yes! Dr. Fauci, the hero, was finally deposed. Let's just say the hero who locked us down with European claims. And okay, lockdowns worked for whatever. The vaccines have worked because we're back to normal in a way. I will say that. But overall, Dr. Fauci just is just too much. And I think he's lying in this deposition where he says he couldn't recall facts that Attorney General Eric Schmidt of Missouri and Louisiana's Jeff Landry were trying to bring to his attention about his own NIAID. There was a November 23rd deposition of the 38-year veteran of the NIAID and, of course, chief medical advisor to President Joe Biden. And this deposition was part in response to an 86-page lawsuit filed by both Schmidt and Landry because they were worried about First Amendment rights being suppressed by the Biden administration. And I will get to the First Amendment part, but I want to get to the science part because he's Mr. Science, isn't he? He's Dr. Fauci. We believe everything. Even though in email he wrote, drugstore masks don't work. That's what he basically wrote. But on public television, he said, oh, mask up, blah, blah, blah. But there was a few lines from this deposition. I'm going to link it in the description below, which I'm really fired up about. And when asked about this contract with a group called EcoHealth Alliance, which was, funding work on the COVID strain and the manipulation of the COVID strain, if you will, and the virus. When asked about whether or not gain of function, whether or not, if he was aware, NIAID was funding this manipulation of the virus, where, if you will, the virus itself, in labs, and I guess in Wuhan, back in, 14, 15, when there was supposedly a pause on gain of function. There's so much complexity to this, but from a humorous / taxpayer-related side, he said one comment, which I think is the mentality of every damn bureaucrat in Washington. He said, and I quote, thousands of pages come across my desk. Thousands of pages come across my desk. Did I know that we were funding this manipulation of a virus that would become a widespread pandemic? I can't recall. Because thousands of pages. Can you imagine if we had this mentality all over the place? Thousands of pages across my desk, so this fell through the cracks. Can you imagine if everybody on the planet had that mentality? I don't know. Because that would mean worse things were happening. Just like a tip fell through the cracks in Miami and FBI and Stoneman Douglas's shooting happened. when it's a private corporation, yes, things slip through the cracks, and not only, but when you have government agencies that we're paying for, have people running agencies like this health agency, NIAID, telling in a deposition, thousands of pages come across my desk. I do not recall whether or not we funded this research of the coronavirus strain that escaped a lab in Wuhan. It's disgusting to me that was his response. I can go into 20,000 other things in this deposition, but that one stood out to me the most. That you're going to say you're overwhelmed, you're buried in papers, but somehow this thing that now has escaped and caused death and really shut us down skipped your, purview because thousands of pages cross your desk. That is, that excuse, unfortunately this thing did escape a lab. Unfortunately, obviously research was going on to manipulate this virus for it to escape. That's the unfortunate part. But the excuses, the I do not recalls by Fauci are why he needs to retire, and thank God he is. I think sooner than later, by the way. But why this is also important to me is I think it lays the groundwork to show us what bureaucracy is. That statement of thousands of pages come across my desk, it just seems like that's such a representative statement of Washington, of bureaucracy. Things fall through the cracks with our government because they don't want to look through everything. Or they want to focus on certain things. Meanwhile, the average American is suffering right now. The average American is suffering, and we're hearing that because thousands of pages, he cannot recall. And then he said this, this great line. From the Washington Post, he quoted his own thing because they asked him about the paragraphs of an op-ed he wrote in 2011. He says, risks we are taking when it comes to the pandemic influenza we're handling it best as possible, basically. And then said, a risk is worth taking if the benefit is to protect the American and the global public. In other words, risking manipulation of a virus, that in a lab, which also was happening in Boston University, is okay because it could protect the public. Not if the public gets it. And this mentality of continuing to test because it's the benefit of the American should scare us. Okay? And I have a little bronchitis still, but I'm yelling right now because this should scare us. Because he's not the only one with that mentality. I believe there are doctors and scientists who want to continue researching a gain of function, which apparently is no longer a term used in the science community, according to Fauci in the deposition. But it scares me that is his mentality because I think that he's not the only one. I know it's very controversial to say, should we even fund this labs if all they're doing is testing and being biohazardous or worried about biosafety or not worried about biosafety? If these labs are getting the money and being careless with their research, should we even be funding them? That might sound anti-science, but look what's happened the last 2 years. And then he had the gall to tell the deposition attorney John Sauer of Schmidt's office, well, I hope you got your influenza vaccine, that we worked on. I hope you got that. The nerve. The nerve to tell your deposer, is that what you call him? Hey, I hope you got the vaccine that we just produced in the labs you're criticizing. I am so glad that he is retiring. Unfortunately, the media will continue to be spotlighting him and highlighting him and not showing you the deposition. This is a part one because I really want to go into more of the whole social media part, because obviously the Twitter dump, now Elon Musk has fired the Twitter lawyer that was involved in all of this, looks like connection with the Hunter Biden laptop. Look, he bought this thing to expose, and that's why they were afraid he was going to do it, I think. Now we know why. It looks like Jim Baker, who was involved in censoring Hunter Biden laptop and Russia probe, has been fired by Elon Musk over suppression of information. Free speech is free speech. Now, I don't agree with allowing hate speech on Twitter. I don't allow with, I guess he's allowed other. I know it's very hard to maintain, but if you can shut down Kanye, you can do others. But this deposition and this lawsuit should open Americans' eyes what bureaucracy against the Biden administration, and this deposition of Fauci should open people's eyes to what bureaucracy is, which is summed up so well by Dr. Fauci himself. Now, there's no audio of it, but, I like to impersonate him, so I'm going to just say it one more time in his voice. Thousands of papers come across my desk. I do not recall. Really? Really? You do not recall? I'm going to actually share the AG's page, because the AG said that Fauci said, I do not recall, 174 times in this deposition. 174 times. He is not just a scientist. He's a politician. He's a talking head. And we have to see him as that. We have to see him as that. Because a scientist and the idea of science increases life. It increases, the possibilities to extend life even. Not death, despair, disgust, darkness, shutdowns. Science is supposed to open our minds up, not shrink them and suppress them. And most importantly, I'm definitely going to name my Mucinex, by the way. Most importantly, science is to be a help, not a jab in the arm. I'm Alex Garrett. We'll talk to you soon. Read the deposition. I'll do this, a part 2 of it as well, on an extended edition of Alex Garrett Podcasting.